Julian is a young gardener with a quiet passion for gemstones, who suddenly finds himself working at the grand estate of a famous jewelry collector. His peaceful world is shaken when a legendary and priceless necklace arrives at the mansion, instantly capturing his curious gaze. But soon his deep knowledge of jewels leads him to a shocking truth: the masterpiece is in fact a forgery. This revelation forces Julian to risk everything and confront the deception, pulling him out of the garden's shadows and into a dangerous world of high-stakes intrigue. When he sets out to reveal the truth to the millionaire, it will either already be too late, or Julian's life will be saved by a single false stone. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Julian's hands were the hands of a craftsman. They were strong and calloused from years of coaxing life from the earth, yet his fingers moved with a delicate, almost surgical precision. He could separate a single wilting petal from a rose without disturbing the others, or repot a fragile orchid seedling with the gentle care usually reserved for a newborn. For Julian, gardening wasn't just a job, it was a conversation with the world, a slow and patient dialogue spoken in the language of soil, sun, and water. His passion was particularly ironic, given his other, more secret fascination. Since he was a boy, growing up in a small, cramped apartment where a single potted plant was a luxury, Julian had been consumed by the world of fine jewelry. Not the gaudy, flashy kind, but the pieces of true artistry, the ones with stories woven into their settings, where a perfectly cut diamond spoke of geological epochs and human ingenuity. He'd spent countless hours in the public library, poring over books on gemology, studying the different cuts of diamonds, the inclusions in emeralds, and the telltale signs of a well-executed setting versus a mass-produced imitation. He could spot a fake cubic zirconia from across a room and could tell a Colombian emerald from a Zambian one just by the shade of green. His knowledge was a quiet, personal treasure, something he never spoke of in his neighborhood, where his gardening skills were the only thing that mattered. This dual devotion, to the earth and to its rarest treasures, led him to the most unlikely of places, the sprawling estate of Alistair Finch. Finch was not just a millionaire, he was a titan of the tech industry who had retired early to indulge his singular passion, collecting jewelry. His estate, a sprawling mansion of glass and steel set on 20 acres of manicured land, was a fortress of luxury. Julian had gotten the job not through a traditional application, but because a mutual acquaintance had seen his work at a local botanical garden and, knowing Finch's obsession with perfection, had recommended him. Julian's gardening style was less about rigid formality and more about controlled chaos, a wild beauty that felt natural and alive. It was a bold departure from the staid, perfectly symmetrical gardens of other estates, and it was exactly what Finch had been looking for. On his first day, Julian felt a peculiar mix of awe and unease. The grounds were immaculate, a testament to the dozens of gardeners who had come before him, all of whom had been dismissed for failing to meet Finch's impossible standards. The head butler, a man named Mr. Harrington, with a perpetually pinched expression and an uncomfortably starched collar, had given Julian a tour of the grounds with a thinly veiled air of condescension. "Mr. Finch expects nothing short of perfection, Mr. Julian," Harrington had said, his voice as dry as old leaves. "He doesn't care for excuses about poor soil or sudden weather changes. The garden is a reflection of his own aesthetic, flawless." Julian simply nodded, his eyes already assessing the soil composition, the pH levels of the rose bushes, and the subtle signs of nutrient deficiency in the hydrangeas. He felt a quiet hum of excitement. This wasn't just a job, it was a challenge. He was a master of his craft, and the earth here, though well tended, was not loved. He could see it in the listless way the boxwoods clung to their shape, in the lack of vibrant color in the perennial beds. He could fix it. His living quarters were humble, a small but clean cottage tucked away at the edge of the property far from the main house. It was perfect. It gave him privacy and a space to be himself, to unroll his collection of gemology books and study late into the night. It also afforded him a view of the main house, a glittering monolith of light and glass that was as imposing as its owner. A few days later he finally met the millionaire himself. Alistair Finch was not what Julian had expected. He wasn't the slick, suit-wearing type Julian had seen in magazines. Finch was a man in his 60s, with a wild shock of white hair and a pair of spectacles perched precariously on the end of his nose. He wore a plush velvet smoking jacket over his jeans and had a habit of gesticulating wildly when he spoke. Julian, my man. Look at this. Look at this, the way you've brought the soil back to life. Finch exclaimed, gesturing at a patch of irises Julian had been working on. It has a certain spirit. The other gardeners, they had no spirit. They were just planting things. Julian smiled, a genuine, warm smile. He liked Finch's energy, his unfiltered passion. They were just following a formula, sir, Julian said. The garden needs more than a formula. It needs a soul. Finch's eyes lit up. Exactly. A soul. You understand, Julian? I knew I was right about you. Everyone told me to hire some fancy landscape artist, but I wanted someone who could feel the pulse of the earth. And you, my friend, you have it. Their conversation lasted for hours, ranging from the best way to cultivate an heirloom rose to the subtle differences in the hue of a sapphire. Julian was surprised. He had assumed Finch would only be interested in the superficial aspects of his garden, but he seemed to have a genuine appreciation for the art of creation, whether it was a blooming flower or a flawless gem. It was during this conversation that Finch brought up his collection. You know, Julian, I have to show you the crown jewel of my collection. I've just acquired it. It's a piece of history and impossible beauty. It's not just about the value you see. It's about the legacy, the sheer artistry of it all. Finch paused, his eyes gleaming with an almost childlike excitement. It's arriving tomorrow. The Aurora Celeste. Julian's heart skipped a beat. The Aurora Celeste. He knew the name. It was a legendary necklace, a cascade of flawless, pigeon-blood rubies set in platinum, said to have been commissioned by a European royal family centuries ago. He'd only ever seen grainy photographs in his books. The prospect of seeing it in person, of being in the same space as a piece of history he had only dreamed of, sent a shiver of pure exhilaration down his spine. The garden, for a brief moment, ceased to be the most beautiful thing on the property. As Finch walked away, still muttering excitedly about his new acquisition, Julian returned to his work, his mind now racing. He felt the weight of the moment. He was here on this sprawling estate, not just as a gardener, but as a silent admirer, a devotee of the same form of artistry that obsessed its owner. And tomorrow, a masterpiece was coming to town. He knew he had to see it. Not out of curiosity, but out of a deep, abiding respect for the art he loved so dearly. The thought made his hands move a little faster, a little more purposefully, as he prepared the earth for its next great creation. The air on the Finch estate felt different. It hummed with a nervous energy, a palpable tension that seemed to have infected even the tranquil garden. The gardeners, usually a quiet and focused lot, whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the main house as if expecting a royal procession. For Julian, the change in atmosphere was a symphony of anticipation. He knew what it was all about. Today the Aurora Celeste was coming home. He had started his day earlier than usual, a quiet restlessness having stirred him from his sleep. He felt like a student on the morning of a final exam, a deep sense of purpose pushing him forward. He worked on the rare, finicky Echinopsis cacti in the greenhouse, their delicate blooms a stark contrast to the sheer magnitude of the event unfolding outside. He pruned, watered, and spoke to them in a soft murmur, finding solace in the predictable rhythm of his work. It was an anchor to reality, a grounding force against the whirlwind of wealth and extravagance that was about to descend upon the property. As the morning wore on, the estate staff became a blur of frantic activity. White-gloved hands polished every surface to a blinding shine. Maids, usually reserved, scurried across the lawn, their faces a mix of excitement and anxiety. Leading the charge, of course, was Mr. Harrington, the head butler. His usual pinched expression had tightened into a mask of pure, unadulterated stress. He barked orders with a low, clipped voice, his movements as precise and rigid as a metronome. Julian was on his hands and knees, tending to a patch of heirloom tomatoes, when Harrington's shadow fell over him. "Mr. Julian," the butler said, his tone dripping with an icy disdain. "I trust you are keeping the grounds immaculate? Mr. Finch has guests arriving with the delivery. He would be most displeased if a single leaf were out of place." Julian looked up, a fleck of dirt on his cheek. "The garden will be perfect, Mr. Harrington," he said calmly. "It's what I do." Harrington's lip curled in a fleeting, contemptuous sneer. "Indeed. A simple, predictable task. unlike the delicate matters of security and protocol, which you, naturally, have no comprehension of. He straightened his jacket as if the very air around Julian were dirty and strode away. Julian sighed, a small, weary sound. He knew Harrington's type. The old guard who saw the world in rigid hierarchies and couldn't fathom someone like Julian, a black man with hands in the dirt, having a depth of knowledge that rivaled the elite. He was a piece of furniture to Harrington, a tool for a purpose and nothing more. It was a prejudice Julian had faced his entire life, and it no longer stung, but it still felt like a heavy, invisible weight. Just before noon, the moment arrived. Julian, pretending to check the drainage of a sprinkler head near the main driveway, was in the perfect position. A sleek, armored car, black and intimidating, glided silently up the long, winding drive. Behind it, a second, less imposing sedan followed. The estate was locked down. A team of private security guards, their faces impassive, emerged from the cars and fanned out, their movements rehearsed and efficient. They were like a well-oiled machine, their presence a silent reminder of the immense value of the object they were protecting. Finally, two men in tailored suits, their expressions somber, emerged from the sedan. They moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, their bodies radiating a cautious tension. Between them, cradled on a cushion of plush velvet inside a thick, metal-reinforced briefcase, was the Aurora Celeste. Even from a distance, Julian could see the way the rubies seemed to capture the sunlight and turn it into a deep, crimson fire. It was breathtaking. The sheer scale of it, the impossible glow of the stones, was more profound than any photograph could ever convey. It was not just jewelry, it was a condensed moment of pure, liquid beauty. He watched as Alistair Finch himself, looking like an excited schoolboy, burst from the front doors to greet them. He gesticulated wildly, his voice a muffled but joyous sound that Julian could just make out on the still air. Harrington stood behind him, a statue of professional poise, while the rest of the staff watched from the windows, their awe and curiosity momentarily overriding their anxiety. The security guards, all business, kept a watchful eye, their gazes sweeping the perfectly manicured lawn and its singular, absorbed gardener. Julian's heart hammered a frantic beat against his ribs. He felt a profound sense of privilege, of being a secret witness to a historical event. He saw the security guards eyeing him, but he simply continued to fuss with the sprinkler head, his movements slow and deliberate, feigning an ignorance of the spectacle. He was an expert at being invisible, a talent he had perfected over the years, and it served him well now. After a few tense minutes, the men and the precious cargo were ushered inside the mansion. The heavy oak doors closed behind them with a low, final thud that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The security guards returned to their cars, and the nervous hum of the estate slowly began to dissipate. Julian, however, was still humming with an almost frantic energy. He had seen it. He had seen the most famous necklace in the world. He returned to his work, his hands moving with an even greater sense of purpose, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the necklace. He thought about its history, the hands that had touched it, the stories it had seen. He had a deep, personal connection to the piece, a bond born of his knowledge and his passion. As the day bled into evening and the sun began its slow descent, Julian found himself drawn back to the mansion, his curiosity now a powerful current pulling him forward. He finished his work and retreated to his small cottage, but the image of the rubies, so brilliantly, impossibly red, was seared into his mind. He knew he had to get a closer look. Not just for his own personal fascination, but to truly understand the legend that had just arrived. He had to be sure it was as real and as beautiful as the book said it was. The morning after the Aurora Celeste's arrival, the Finch estate was transformed into a tableau of discreet celebration. A small but impeccably curated garden party was underway in the courtyard adjacent to the main salon. Soft, classical music drifted on the warm breeze, mingling with the scent of blooming jasmine. Julian worked quietly on a hedge border, his shears clipping with a rhythmic precision that was almost meditative. His presence was so unassuming that he was practically invisible to the dozen or so guests, a mix of art dealers, tech magnates and socialites, who sipped champagne and chatted in hushed, reverent tones. Alistair Finch, dressed in a crisp linen suit, moved through the crowd with a triumphant air. He was a conductor, and the necklace, hidden from view for the moment, was his masterpiece. The conversation of the guests, however, grated on Julian's nerves. He overheard a woman with a diamond-encrusted watch declare, "Oh, the valuation is simply staggering. I heard it's more than the entire Swiss royal treasury." Another man, a slick-looking art dealer, nodded sagely, "The investment potential is immense. A piece like this only appreciates." Their words were a constant, hollow drumbeat, a focus on monetary value that Julian found crude and dismissive of the true artistry. They were talking about a piece of history as if it were a stock certificate. Then a new voice cut through the murmur, a younger, more sardonic tone. "Really, uncle? You'd think you'd found the Holy Grail, the way you're carrying on." Julian glanced up just in time to see a man in his late 30s, his posture a study in calculated nonchalance, lean against a marble balustrade. This was Marcus Finch, Alistair's nephew and heir apparent to the family fortune. Unlike his uncle's wild enthusiasm, Marcus exuded a cool, almost detached boredom. His face was handsome but held a subtle, tired sneer. Alistair's face, which had been beaming with pride, clouded over instantly. "Marcus, must you be so cynical?" Alistair said, his voice dropping slightly. "This isn't just an acquisition. It's an act of preservation. The Aurora Celeste is a work of genius, a monument to human craft." Marcus simply shrugged, his eyes scanning the crowd. "It's a necklace, uncle. A very expensive one, I'll grant you. But it's still just jewelry. Can we get this over with? I have a flight to catch." The tension between them was thick enough to cut with Julian's pruning shears. It was clear that Marcus had little to no interest in his uncle's passion, and perhaps harbored a resentment that went deeper than just a difference in taste. Julian watched the exchange, a quiet observer of a family drama unfolding in the heart of the celebration. Finally, Alistair, visibly annoyed, turned his attention back to his guests. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming with a renewed sense of purpose, "the moment you have all been waiting for. The reason we are all here. The Aurora Celeste." Two security guards appeared, flanking a small, mahogany pedestal covered by a velvet cloth. Alistair, with a flourish that Julian found both comical and touching, lifted the cloth. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Julian stopped working, his eyes fixed on the display. The necklace was held within a reinforced glass case, set atop a black velvet mount. The lighting was perfect, designed to make every facet of every stone sing. From this distance, he could see the incredible artistry of the setting. The platinum was a whisper, a delicate framework that seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving the rubies to float, suspended like drops of frozen blood. They were magnificent, their color a deep, rich red that seemed to vibrate with an inner light. But as Julian's gaze swept over the cascading rubies, his expert eye caught a detail that sent a cold jolt through him. He focused on a single ruby near the center of the necklace. He had memorized the details of the Aurora Celeste from his books. He knew the exact shade of pigeon blood red that made those Burmese rubies so legendary. It was a pure, vibrant crimson, with a hint of what gemologists called a fluorescent glow. But this stone, and as he looked closer, a few others scattered throughout the piece, held a subtle, almost imperceptible purplish tint. It was a minor detail, but a crucial one. It was the shade of a ruby from a different region, a different mine entirely. It was a telltale sign of a substitution, an almost flawless fake. The knowledge, a private, personal truth from all his years of study, hit him like a physical blow. His heart began to pound with a frantic beat. No, he told himself. It must be the lighting. The glass. A trick of the eye. He was a gardener, a man who worked with his hands, not a world-renowned gemologist. But his internal voice, the one that had studied every flaw and every perfect facet for years, was insistent. Something was wrong. The purplish tint was too distinct, too consistent. It was a lie hidden in plain sight. He forced himself to go back to his work, his hands moving on autopilot, but his mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. He was seeing the most famous necklace in the world, a piece he had idolized, and his brain was screaming, fake. But how could that be? Alistair Finch was a man who surrounded himself with experts, who had spent millions on this piece. Could he have been fooled? Could the legendary Aurora Celeste, the crown jewel of his collection, be a fraud? As the party began to wind down and the last guests departed, Julian felt a new kind of purpose settle in his heart. The simple fascination he'd had was gone, replaced by a consuming need for the truth. He needed to get a closer look, a real look without the glare of the lights and the watchful eyes of the crowd. He needed to hold the stones in his hand, to feel their weight and to see if his gut instinct was correct. He knew he was putting himself at immense risk. Harrington's warnings about security, the private guards, the sheer value of the piece, all of it screamed danger. But the intellectual puzzle, the profound question of authenticity, was a pull he couldn't resist. He was Julian the gardener, but tonight he would be something more. A detective, a guardian of the truth. The estate was a different world under the cover of night. The meticulously manicured lawns and vibrant flower beds that Julian tended by day were swallowed by shadow, becoming a landscape of hushed secrets. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, a sound that in the daytime would have been a gentle sigh, but now felt like a warning whisper. Julian, dressed in dark clothing, moved with the quiet grace of a creature of the night, his mind a steel trap of focus and his heart a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. He had left a note for Mr. Harrington, a carefully worded lie about an early start to prepare a new rose bed. It was a flimsy alibi, but it was all he had. The real reason he was out was simple: he had to know. The small, niggling doubt that had sprouted in his mind during the garden party had grown into a consuming, unshakable certainty. His entire life of study, of quiet obsession, had prepared him for this single, dangerous moment. Julian made his way to the back of the mansion, avoiding the brightly lit sections and the areas he knew were monitored by security cameras. His work on the property had given him an intimate knowledge of its layout, its blind spots and its forgotten corners. He found a seldom-used service entrance near the kitchen, a heavy oak door that he knew would be left unlocked at night for the early morning delivery crews. He slipped inside, the sound of the door's quiet click and latch echoing in the sudden claustrophobic silence of the hallway. The mansion's interior at night was a maze of hushed luxury. The grand staircase was a dark spiral leading to an unknown floor. The furniture, which looked so inviting in the daytime, now stood like silent, hulking monoliths. Julian used a tiny pen-sized flashlight he kept in his pocket, its beam a narrow pinprick of light that he directed only at the floor, carefully avoiding any reflective surfaces. He followed the mental map he had created during his brief tour with Mr. Harrington, navigating a labyrinth of hallways and side passages until he reached the wing of the house he knew housed Alistair Finch's collection. The display room was a grand, cathedral-like space, its high ceiling giving it a sense of quiet reverence. But the reverence was shattered by the immense, humming security system. Lasers crisscrossed the room, a delicate web of red light that Julian knew would trigger a silent alarm with the slightest disturbance. He watched them for a moment, his breath held in his lungs, his mind racing. He was a gardener, not a cat burglar, but he had spent enough time watching documentaries on both gemology and high-tech heists to know the basics. He had to be a ghost, a presence that was there but left no trace. He found the Aurora Celeste in a reinforced glass case, set on a pedestal in the center of the room. A single, powerful spotlight illuminated it, a theatrical touch that even in the dead of night made the rubies glow with an almost supernatural intensity. But Julian's professional eye was no longer fooled by the theatrics. He saw the subtle, purplish tint from his previous viewing, now magnified by the focused light. He knew what he was looking at. He had to get closer. He meticulously planned his approach, his body a fluid series of movements that ducked, weaved, and stepped over the silent laser alarms. He moved like a dancer, a human ballet of stillness and motion, his mind calculating every inch of space, every angle of the light. He made it to the glass case without incident, the silence around him so complete he could hear the frantic beat of his own heart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal-cased jeweler's loupe, a gift he had bought for himself years ago with his first paycheck from a garden center. He pressed the loupe against the glass, peering at the stones. He could see their details with an incredible clarity now. He examined the largest rubies first, the ones he had seen from the garden party. The purplish tint was undeniable, a hue that marked them as a different variety of ruby entirely, likely from the Thai or Cambodian mines, not the legendary Burmese variety. He then shifted his focus, looking for the telltale signs of authenticity he had spent a lifetime studying. Genuine rubies, even flawless ones, would have minute inclusions, what gemologists call silk. A fine, feathery texture that looks like shimmering threads woven into the stone. But these stones were unnaturally perfect. He saw no silk, no flaws, only the cold, hard clarity of a synthetic ruby, a lab-grown imitation created to deceive. His hand trembled as he moved the loop to examine the setting. The intricate platinum filigree that had looked so delicate and masterful in the light of day now revealed a different story. He saw microscopic tool marks, the tiny indentations of a machine press, a subtle but distinct difference from the careful artisanal work of handcrafted jewelry. A master craftsman, a true artist, would have spent months on a piece like this. The tools would have left a different kind of mark. He felt a profound, heartbreaking sadness wash over him. It was a fraud. A beautiful, carefully orchestrated lie. Alistair Finch, the man who had spoken with such passion about the soul of a garden and the art of a gem, had been sold a fake. Julian, the humble gardener, the man who Mr. Harrington had dismissed as a simple laborer, was the only one who knew the truth. He stepped back from the case, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. The exhilaration of the past few hours had been replaced by a heavy sense of moral duty. He could walk away. He could leave the mansion, go back to his cottage, and pretend he had never seen anything. No one would ever know. But Julian was not that kind of man. He couldn't let Alistair Finch live this lie, not when he had so much passion for the real thing. He had to tell him. He carefully navigated the laser grid once more, leaving the display room and making his way to the main part of the house. He knew Finch worked late into the night in his study, a habit he had learned from Mr. Harrington. He found the door and, with a deep breath that felt like a plunge into a freezing lake, he knocked. "Alistair?" he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "It's Julian. We need to talk." The moment Julian's knuckles connected with the heavy oak door, he felt the full weight of his decision. The rhythmic knocking was a defiant sound in the night's stillness, a challenge to the world of wealth and privilege he was about to disrupt. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, the door swung inward. Alistair Finch stood in the doorway, his face a mask of annoyance and confusion. He was dressed in a plush smoking jacket, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. "Julian?" he said, his voice laced with irritation. "What in the world are you doing here at this hour? I trust there isn't an emergency with the dahlias." His tone was patronizing, a clear reminder of their respective stations in life. Julian was an employee and he was trespassing on private time. Julian, however, did not waver. He met Alistair's gaze with a steady, unblinking intensity that seemed to catch the older man off guard. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir," Julian said, his voice low and firm. "But this is an emergency. It's about the Aurora Celeste." Alistair's expression hardened. "The necklace is perfectly secure. It's not your concern. Now, if you'll excuse me." "It's a fake," Julian cut in, the words hanging in the air like a sudden, frigid mist. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Alistair's hand, holding the glass, froze in mid-air. His face, which had been set in a look of dismissal, went slack with shock. "What did you say?" he asked, the words barely a whisper. Julian repeated himself, his voice unwavering. "Sir, the Aurora Celeste is a fraud. I've examined it. It's a very good imitation, but it's not the genuine article." Alistair's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "How dare you?" he snarled, stepping forward, his body rigid with rage. "Do you think I'm some common fool? Do you think I would spend $200 million on a piece of glass? You are a gardener, Julian. You know nothing of these things. Get off my property this instant before I call security and have you removed for insubordination." The outburst Julian had expected. He held his ground. "Sir, with all due respect, I know gems. I've studied them my entire life. I can show you the proof." Alistair stared at him, his anger warring with a dawning, terrible curiosity. Julian's quiet conviction, his refusal to be cowed, was a powerful tool. It was a language the millionaire understood, the fierce, unyielding passion of a true expert. "You're coming with me," Alistair said, his voice devoid of all warmth. He turned on his heel and strode back into the house, leaving Julian to follow. The walk back to the display room was a journey into the heart of a shattered dream. Alistair's heavy footsteps echoed through the silent hallways, each one a hammer blow to his ego and his pride. He unlocked the heavily reinforced door, the clanking of the bolts a harsh punctuation in the quiet. He gestured at the case with a trembling hand. "Show me," he commanded. "Show me this proof." Julian approached the case. The Aurora Celeste, bathed in its solitary spotlight, seemed to shimmer with an arrogant, deceptive beauty. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out his jeweler's loupe. He pressed it against the glass and pointed to a large ruby in the center of the necklace. "Look here, sir. The color is off. It's a subtle purplish tint, not the pure, deep pigeon blood red of a genuine Burmese ruby. It's the color of a Thai ruby, a different origin entirely. The substitution is meant to be a minor variation, to escape the notice of a layperson." Alistair leaned in, his own face reflected in the glass, a ghostly echo of his distress. He squinted at the ruby, and for the first time, Julian saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Julian continued, his voice now a steady stream of expert observation. "Furthermore, look at the clarity. A true gem of this size and age would have minute inclusions, what gemologists call silk. They are a fingerprint of nature, a sign of authenticity. These stones have none. They are unnaturally perfect, a hallmark of lab-grown synthetics." He then moved the loupe to the filigree setting. "Finally, the platinum work. This is not the delicate, subtle handiwork of a master craftsman. Look at the tiny uniform marks. These are telltale signs of a machine press, a quick, efficient process designed to mimic the appearance of artistry but lacking the soul." Alistair pulled back from the glass case, his face pale and his eyes wide with a look of dawning horror. Julian's words were a relentless, undeniable assault on everything he believed. He had been so proud, so certain. He had trusted his network, his reputation. He had been a collector, an expert. He had been a fraud's victim. He reached out a hand and slowly, almost reverently, touched the glass of the display case, as if to feel the cold, hard lie of the rubies for himself. The silence in the room was a deafening testament to his shattered pride. After a long, agonizing moment, he turned to Julian, his face etched with a mix of awe and defeat. "How could you possibly know all this?" he asked, his voice raw. Julian looked down at his calloused hands. "Sir, jewelry is my passion. Since I was a boy, I was fascinated. I couldn't afford to own it, so I studied it. I read every book, every article, memorized every detail of every famous piece. I knew the Aurora Celeste like a friend. I knew its story, its soul. And when I saw it, I knew something was wrong. My mind knew it before my heart did." Alistair stared at him, his expression one of profound humility. The gap between the gardener and the millionaire had, in an instant, vanished. They were two men united by a love of beauty and a betrayal that had struck at the very core of that love. "I have been surrounded by so-called experts," Alistair said, his voice bitter. "And a gardener, a man who knows the soul of a plant, is the only one who saw the truth." They returned to the study, the shared secret a heavy cloak between them. Alistair poured himself another whiskey, his hands still trembling. "So what do we do, Julian?" he asked, his eyes for the first time filled with a desperate helplessness. "I have a fraud on my hands, a piece of glass that has just cost me $200 million. And the question remains, who did this? And more importantly, how?" He looked at Julian, the simple gardener, a man he had so easily dismissed, and saw the only person he could trust. He knew with a chilling certainty that this betrayal was an inside job. The only person who hadn't been a part of this world of wealth and lies was the one who had seen through it all. The air in Alistair Finch's study was thick with the scent of old books, expensive cigar smoke, and a new, acrid tang of betrayal. The shock and rage that had consumed him moments earlier had now curdled into a cold, focused fury. He paced the length of his antique Persian rug, the only sound in the room his measured, heavy footsteps. Julian stood in the middle of the room, a silent witness to a man's world collapsing around him. He was no longer the humble gardener. He was now a confidant, a conspirator. The sudden shift in their dynamic was as profound as the lie in the Aurora Celeste itself. Finally, Alistair stopped and looked at Julian, his eyes a mixture of anguish and an almost frightening clarity. "How could I have been so blind?" he said, the question more a statement to himself than a request for an answer. "The experts I hired, the security firms, the appraisers, they all swore on their reputations." He shook his head, a single bitter laugh escaping his lips. "And all this time, the truth was in the hands of a man I barely noticed." He gestured to Julian's calloused hands, the hands that had tended his roses and now held the key to his undoing. Julian didn't offer platitudes. He simply waited. He knew Alistair wasn't just talking about the necklace anymore. He was talking about his entire life's work, his identity as a discerning collector. Alistair poured another whiskey, his hands still unsteady. He stared into the amber liquid as if searching for answers. I have to know, Julian. Who did this? And more importantly, how did they manage to swap it out so flawlessly? We're talking about the most sophisticated security system in the world. The necklace never left my sight. Julian's mind, however, was already a few steps ahead. His expertise wasn't just in the stones themselves, but in the observation of people, in the quiet details that others missed. He thought back to the arrival of the necklace, to the procession of employees who had carried it in, to the controlled chaos of the garden party. It had to have been done on the property, sir, Julian said, his voice quiet but authoritative, and it had to have been an inside job. Alistair looked at him, his brow furrowed. An inside job? Who could have done such a thing? The only people who had access were my most trusted staff. That's the point, sir, Julian explained patiently. No one else would have had the opportunity. The window of time was too small, the security too tight. Think about it. The fake had to be in place before the real one was even unwrapped. The people who carried it in, they were just carrying a box. The swap happened before it was ever placed in the display case. It was a bait and switch, a masterpiece of misdirection. Alistair's eyes widened with the force of the realization. So they brought in a fake and my people, the ones I trusted, carried it in, never knowing they were carrying a worthless piece of glass? But who? Julian's thoughts turned to Marcus Finch, the sneer on his face at the garden party, his utter disdain for his uncle's passion. I saw your nephew Marcus at the party today, sir, he said carefully. He seemed displeased with the purchase. He said it was just a necklace. Alistair's face twisted with a new kind of pain. Marcus. He's my nephew, my heir. He's always been more interested in the family's tech empire than my collection. He sees it as a frivolous obsession, a waste of money. But he would never, surely he wouldn't? The unspoken question hung in the air. Julian didn't have the answer, but he knew where to start looking. Marcus is just one possibility, Julian said, steering Alistair back to the facts. But the method is the key. They must have prepared the fake in advance, knowing the exact dimensions and weight of the case. They had to know the moment the real necklace arrived, and they had to have a way to make the swap without anyone noticing. It's an act of planning and precision, not a simple theft. Alistair, for the first time, seemed to deflate. The fury was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. He sank into a leather armchair, a man who had suddenly aged 20 years. So what do we do, Julian? I can't go to the police. The scandal would destroy my reputation. My name would become a joke. The value of my entire collection would plummet. The thieves know that. They have me over a barrel. Julian thought for a moment, his gaze settling on a small, unassuming jade elephant on Alistair's desk. He saw the elephant not as a decoration but as an object, a thing of weight and dimension. He had to be a ghost, a presence that was there but left no trace. The solution was in his very nature. Sir, Julian said, his voice a low, steady murmur. You can't go to the authorities. But you don't have to. He walked over to the desk and picked up the jade elephant, its cool, smooth weight a pleasant sensation in his palm. I'm a gardener. I'm invisible. I have access to every part of this property, and no one pays me any mind. I can look, I can listen. I can find things that your security guards and your expensive detectives would never even think to look for. My knowledge of jewelry is my weapon. My position is my camouflage. Alistair looked at him, a flicker of hope in his eyes. You're suggesting we conduct our own investigation? Not we, sir, Julian said, putting the elephant back on the desk. I am. You can't be seen as the victim. You have to maintain the illusion. The Aurora Celeste is still the Aurora Celeste. It is still in your case. Your guests must believe it, the public must believe it. The person who did this must believe that their deception was a success. That is our greatest advantage. The idea, so audacious and yet so simple, seemed to reinvigorate Alistair. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, a glint of the old collector's fire in his eyes. A ghost in my own house, he mused. A detective hidden in plain sight. Julian, you're a genius. I'm just a man who knows a genuine from a fake, sir, Julian said, a small, wry smile on his lips. I can help you. I will do everything I can to find out who did this. But we have to work together and we have to be absolutely certain before we make a move." Alistair nodded, a new sense of purpose in his posture. He reached out and for the first time shook Julian's hand. It was a strong, firm grip, a pact forged in the dead of night between two men who had nothing in common but a shared enemy. "There are a few things I can provide for you," Alistair said, his mind already working on the practicalities. "The guest list from tonight's party, the list of the delivery crew, and a complete schematic of the security system. You will need to know its every weakness, its every blind spot. We will go over it tomorrow morning here in this study. No one can know about this, Julian. No one. Not even Mr. Harrington. This is between you and me." Julian nodded, the gravity of the task settling over him. He had walked into the lion's den, not as a victim but as a silent hunter. He had been a gardener who found a lie in a jewel. Now he was a man who would find a truth in the darkness. He had no idea what he was up against, but he knew one thing for certain. His journey had just begun. The estate, once Julian's tranquil sanctuary, had transformed into a labyrinth of suspicion and hidden motives. Every clipped hedge and every pruned rose bush now felt like a part of a much larger, more dangerous game. He moved through the gardens with the same silent efficiency as before, but his senses were heightened, his mind no longer solely focused on the health of the flora. He was a hunter now, a ghost in plain sight, using his invisibility as his greatest weapon. His days were a choreographed dance of duality. By day he was the devoted gardener, speaking with Mr. Harrington about soil acidity and pest control, sharing a kind word with the kitchen staff, and exchanging pleasantries with the security guards on their patrols. By night, he was the silent investigator, meeting Alistair in the seclusion of the study. There, the two men, so disparate in their backgrounds, pored over schematics of the mansion's security system, their heads bent together over the intricate wiring diagrams. Alistair had been true to his word. He had provided Julian with a digital blueprint of the estate's entire security network, a complex web of motion sensors, silent alarms, and hidden cameras. He had also given him a copy of the guest list from the garden party and the manifest from the security company that had delivered the Aurora Celeste. It was a staggering amount of information, a key to a kingdom of secrets. Julian started his investigation by walking the path of the necklace's delivery. According to the manifest, the armored truck had parked at the service entrance on the far side of the estate, away from prying eyes. The two security guards had then carried the heavy, sealed case through a series of internal passages to the grand hall, where it was unveiled and presented. Julian walked that same path, his mind a steel trap, searching for anything out of place. He noticed a small, rarely used service elevator near the main pantry, a detail that wasn't on the public blueprints. The elevator shaft was dark, the door ajar, and the space behind it smelled of old dust and something faintly metallic. He made a mental note to return later. He then turned his attention to the people. He observed the staff, a community he had always known and respected, but now saw with a new, critical eye. He noticed the head butler, a man named Bartholomew, who seemed unusually nervous, his hands trembling when he served Alistair his morning tea. He also noticed the head of security, a sharp-faced man named Davis, who seemed to be conducting a private, unannounced review of the camera footage from the day of the delivery. The most telling, however, were the actions of Marcus. Julian had noticed Marcus's odd behavior during the party. He had been a study in detached contempt, a man who saw his uncle's passion as an embarrassing indulgence. Now, in the days following the event, Marcus was a phantom. He appeared and disappeared from the estate at strange hours, and his conversations with the staff were brief, terse, and often laced with an impatience that seemed out of character. On one occasion Julian overheard him on a phone call, his voice a low, angry murmur. "It's a done deal, it's done. We can't talk about it here. Everything is fine. He knows nothing." The words, cryptic and chilling, sent a shiver down Julian's spine. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place. Julian returned to the small, dark service elevator. He found the door unlatched and slipped inside, the air thick with the smell of old dust and something else, a new scent, almost floral. He looked around with his penlight, its beam cutting through the shadows. The space was mostly empty, save for a few cleaning supplies and a forgotten cardboard box tucked away in a corner. It was an unassuming box, the kind you would find in any supply closet, but something about it nagged at Julian. He examined it more closely. It had once contained expensive tools, the kind used for delicate, precise work. On the bottom, where the box was creased, was a small, smudged print. Not of a finger but a pattern. It was the distinct mark of an expensive European-made machine press, the exact kind he had seen on the fake filigree of the Aurora Celeste. He then knelt down and ran his fingers across the dusty floor. He felt a small hard object and picked it up. It was a shard of glass, no bigger than his thumbnail, and it glimmered with the same unsettling purplish tint he had seen in the ruby. He pocketed the evidence, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had found it. The needle in the haystack. The place where the swap had been made, the place where the real Aurora Celeste had been taken out of its case and replaced with a worthless piece of glass. He now had the what and the where. All that remained was the who. That night he met Alistair in the study. Alistair's face was etched with exhaustion, the strain of keeping up the public pretense taking its toll. Julian emptied his pockets on the grand mahogany desk. The cardboard box, the glass shard, and a few other small items he had found, bits of stray thread and smudges of oil, all spoke a silent, damning language. "I found this in the service elevator, sir," Julian said, his voice quiet. "This is where the swap took place. And this is the mark of a machine press. It's the same one used on the fake filigree. This is proof. The fake was made in advance, and a duplicate case was made so that it could be swapped at the last possible moment before the unveiling. The men who carried it in, they had no idea. They just carried the box. The switch was a bait and switch, a masterpiece of misdirection." Alistair picked up the shard of glass, his face pale in the lamplight. "And you said you overheard Marcus on the phone?" "He said it's a done deal, and that you know nothing," Julian recounted, his gaze steady. "Sir, I believe he's involved. And not only him. The heist was too sophisticated for a single person. He must have a partner." Alistair looked at Julian, the weary desperation in his eyes replaced by a cold, furious resolve. The pieces were now falling into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The betrayal was deeper and more personal than he could have ever imagined. He had suspected it was an inside job, but to have his own flesh and blood be the architect of his humiliation was a wound that ran deeper than any financial loss. "We have to be careful, Julian," Alistair said, his voice a low growl. "He's watching. They're both watching. They're waiting for me to make a move. They have to know something is wrong. We have to trap them. We need to lure them out." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Julian's. "We need to make them believe that they failed to cover their tracks. We need to find the real necklace and we need to use it to expose them." Julian nodded, the gravity of the plan settling over him. He was no longer just a gardener, he was a key player in a game of deception and high-stakes revenge. The hunter had become the hunted, and the next move could be his last. He had a suspect and a plan. The plan was as audacious as the deception it was meant to unravel. Alistair, with Julian's guidance, orchestrated a quiet lie, a single carefully placed drop of information designed to create a ripple effect. He let it be known to a select few, including Marcus, that the Aurora Celeste had experienced a minor technical flaw in its setting and would require a brief, private inspection by a world-renowned gemologist. The implication was clear. The necklace was being moved, albeit temporarily, to a secure, off-site location for repair. The bait was set. Julian spent the day in a state of quiet vigilance, his hands meticulously tending to the bonsai trees near the main entrance, his eyes and ears taking in every detail. He saw Marcus pacing near the garden's edge, a phone pressed to his ear, his words a furious, low hiss. "What do you mean they're moving it? It was supposed to be in place for months. This changes everything. We have to act now." Julian heard him hang up and watched him disappear into the shadows of a large oak grove, a place where no one ever ventured. Julian's instincts, honed by years of observation, told him that this was the moment. The thieves, believing their masterpiece of deception was about to be exposed, would make a desperate move. He slipped away from his post, his footsteps silent on the damp earth, and followed Marcus's trail. He found him in the heart of the grove, standing beside a hidden gate that led to a small, secluded road. He was talking to another person, a woman. It was Celeste. "Celeste, we have to go," Marcus said, his voice laced with panic. "They're moving the necklace. The plan is compromised. He must have figured it out." "Calm down," Celeste said, her voice a cool, dangerous counterpoint to his agitation. He can't have figured it out. He's a foolish old man. We just have to make a choice. We either leave it or we recover it. I have the case here hidden in the car. We can still switch them back." Alistair, who had been following Julian at a distance, now stepped out of the shadows. "Too late for that, I'm afraid, Marcus." Marcus and Celeste spun around, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated shock. The sight of Alistair, his face a grim, stony mask of disappointment, was more powerful than any armed guard. "Uncle?" Marcus stammered, his bravado crumbling. "What are you doing here?" Alistair didn't answer him. He looked at Celeste, his gaze a withering mix of recognition and contempt. "Celeste, the brilliant young gemologist. The one who vetted the necklace for me. A master forger, a true artist in your own way. And a thief." Celeste's cool facade finally cracked. "He's right, Marcus," she said, her voice bitter. "He's not as foolish as we thought. You figured it out?" Julian stepped out from behind a large shrub, his presence a silent, final confirmation of their discovery. Marcus's face turned white. He looked from his uncle to the gardener he had so easily dismissed, and the full weight of the betrayal settled over him. "Julian?" he asked, the name a bewildered whisper. "Yes, Julian," Alistair said, his voice full of a cold, quiet fury. "The only one who saw the truth. The only one whose love for these jewels wasn't measured in dollars, but in passion." He turned to his nephew. "Why, Marcus? Why would you do this? I am your family." Marcus's face contorted with a vicious mix of shame and rage. "Family? You've spent your entire life hoarding these ridiculous rocks while the world moved on. While your own family business, the tech empire I built, needed capital. I needed the money to expand, to innovate, to build a legacy that would actually matter. But you would rather squander millions on a piece of jewelry that will just sit in a case and collect dust. You were a relic, uncle. And your collection was holding us all back." Celeste, however, had a different motive. "Your love for the gems is a weakness," she spat at Alistair. "You believe they hold a soul, but they are just stones. I can make a stone that is more perfect, more beautiful than anything nature could ever create. You paid a fortune for a piece of history, and I created a future, a new kind of beauty. I replaced your past with my present. And the fake is a more perfect jewel. It is a true masterpiece." Her eyes glowed with a kind of fanaticism, the obsession of a creator who had outsmarted nature itself. Alistair looked from his nephew to the woman he had trusted, the artist and the pragmatist, united by their shared contempt for his passion. He took out his phone and made a quiet but firm call to the police. "I have them right where they are." While the police sirens wailed in the distance, Julian, his work done, turned away from the scene and walked back into the garden. He had solved the mystery, but the question remained: where was the real Aurora Celeste? He had tracked their movements, listened to their confessions, and knew their methods. He had a theory. He made his way to the greenhouse, his footsteps quick and purposeful. He went to a particular rose bush, a rare, ancient species that had never bloomed, a stubborn, beautiful thing he had spent months trying to nurture. He knelt down, his fingers gently pushing through the soil, searching. He didn't find the necklace. But he found something else, a single, folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and read the words, penned in Marcus's hurried, agitated scrawl: "The old place. Hidden. Don't look too hard, you'll miss it." Julian's eyes widened with comprehension. He knew exactly where the old place was. He hurried to the oldest, most derelict part of the estate, a long-abandoned stone fountain that had been buried under years of moss and neglect. He knelt and plunged his hands into the cold, murky water. He found a small, almost invisible crevice, and with a careful push, a stone slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. He reached inside and felt the cold, hard reality of the jewelry case. He pulled it out, and the sight of it, the intricate platinum filigree, the genuine deep red of the rubies, the perfect, fiery brilliance of the diamonds, was a sight to behold. He had found it. The real Aurora Celeste. The next morning, Julian returned the necklace to a speechless Alistair. The millionaire, his heart full of a gratitude he couldn't put into words, placed the necklace back in its case. The lie was over. The truth was back. In the days that followed, the story of the stolen and recovered Aurora Celeste was kept out of the papers. The Finch family handled the matter internally, and the only ones who knew the full truth were Alistair and Julian. The estate settled back into its quiet rhythm, but a new order had been established. Julian was no longer just a gardener. He was now the head of Alistair's private security and the curator of his entire collection. He would still tend to the gardens, but now he did so with the knowledge that he was not just a laborer but a guardian. He was a man who had proved that a true love for beauty had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with knowledge. His story was a testament to the fact that the most valuable things in the world can be found in the most unexpected of places, and sometimes the most dangerous lies can be uncovered by the most invisible of truths. His journey from the dirt to the diamonds had come to a close, and a new life had begun. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.